We're taking a step back now and putting this day kind of into perspective and looking at what the center of all of this is, and that's Linqto. Linqto is the motive force that's brought all this knowledge together on the GIC stage today for the single purpose of kind of educating our investors and growing our loyal community. So I want to welcome David Paul, who heads up our finance function, Patty Brewer, who we heard from yesterday, our Chief Product Officer, Bill Sarris, our CEO, and of course, Karim Nurani. So Karim, over to you.
Thank you, Irene. So for the audience that's still here, thank you so much for hanging in with this. This is day 3, halfway through. We're going to still have beautiful conversations this afternoon with Coach JV, realigning your relationship with money. We'll have a space topic. We'll have mental health and psychedelics, and then we will have what's going on in space. So we've got a lot to cover, and so I hope you continue to stay with us. And obviously, there might be an exciting raffle shortly after this panel. So if you're here, you might be a winner. If your friends are not here, make sure they arrive quickly, because you have to be here to win. So what's interesting about this panel is Bill and Patty and David were not given any heads up about how this conversation was supposed to go. We just gave them a title, and the title was, what does leadership look like in a rapidly evolving company? And we could stop there. You could look at the photos, and you could look at the pictures on this panel and say, this is what leadership looks like. It's diversified. Everyone has different amounts of hair and colors and gender and age. And we could stop this conversation there and be done.
Thank you, Karim. Can we go back to work now?
Oh, we can go back to work now. But I thought this is actually a very interesting topic for me and all of us to a certain extent, not only Bill, but David and Patty and myself, but as well as most of the audience today here. And we've had yesterday's and tomorrow's and everything that we share on social media. This is relevant. Why? Take a little bit of what Holly has said and Vadim has said. When we look at companies, and we look at companies that are in the startup stage, what it takes to build a company at a startup stage is one thing, whether it's in initial investments, whether it's talent, whether it's market, whether it's product market fit. And then you start to think about, as a company evolves from the zero revenue, zero money, and an initial team of a founder and a co-founder, what happens next? The next is it grows or fails. And if it grows, it either stagnates at that point, raises some more money, runs out of money again, and the cycle continues. And then you get to the stage of, oh my God, we're actually growing more than we thought we would. We're actually making some money, and you've got a different set of problems. It's easy maybe to go from $1 million revenue to 2, maybe 2 to 5, 5 to 10. And what's really interesting, Linqto has continued to exponentially grow within a very short time between 2019 and 2022, the end of 2022. But Linqto has been in existence for many years before that, when we first started to raise money 5 years before 2019. We started putting money into this company in 2016, but it existed before then as well. So as a learning environment, an experience environment, what we want to unpack, Ed, I said it here first time today, Ed, unpack, it's private joke. We've got $1 million and $50 now. I'm going to start with Bill, and then we'll go to Patty. Bill, as we look at this, and we've seen this company evolve rapidly, help us understand what you've seen from as a co-founder and CEO of this company. Help us what you've seen from that seat of this rapidly expanding company, both in team size and revenue size.
So, Karim, I would say, first thing I would say is it's all about the people, and it's not about the product. And much of what we look at and what we talk about in our sessions and in investment sessions, and it has to do with the product. At our angel meetings, when we would do those things, 90% of the time, the presenters are presenting about the product. We've always worked on the team basis. That's why this subject is so important, because it starts with leadership, and then it's there's a trickle down effect from leadership. So if you get the right leadership team in place, then everything else works kind of from that direction downward. And that's what we always concentrate. It's a relatively easy concept if you boil it down to its most basic principle, which, I'm as an engineer, I try to boil things down to basic principles. The basic principle of it is cloning. How do you build a leadership team? You build it through cloning. And this is, going back, I'm a serial entrepreneur, so going back like 5 companies worth, we've always done it that way. The CEO and the COO founder of this company, Vicky and myself, we founded 4 other companies before that. And so we use the same mechanism. The 2 of us started, it's like, I grew up in the restaurant business. It's kind of like that. At 7 years old, I was washing dishes. At 9 years old, I was waiting on tables. 13 years old, I was learning how to cook. By the time I was an adult, I knew every single part of the restaurant business. That didn't mean I did everything, but if I was out front and hosting one night and the dishwasher didn't show up, I'd wash dishes. You know how to wash dishes because you know all that. So it's that same kind of process with building a team. We start at the top with 2 complementary people. She and I've been partners for 5 years longer than we've been married. It just happens that we're complementary. And so she would handle all the operations side of stuff. I would handle all of the engineering and product side of stuff. And then you start cloning. So the first 2 were Vicky and I. Who were the next 2? Her first clone was Carla Hudson, her first CFO, because she was handling all the finance stuff along with her operations. An expert she needed was somebody better than her at finance. And Carla, partner in a major accounting firm, past CFO of a publicly traded company on the board of our local bank, so she had the chops to be our first CFO. For me, what was it? Jared Reed, our current CTO. He was the first person I went out and found, because I had to clone from all the things I do, somebody who was better than myself at engineering. So if you always look to try to find somebody better at yourself in terms of skills for whatever it is that's needed, then it's kind of like mitosis. So 2 becomes 4 and 4 becomes 8, and people start splitting out. And we now have a great leadership team. I love our leadership team. And we see a few of them here, that half of them are here, but Patty's certainly better than can run circles around me when it comes to product. David knows so much more than I do about finance. Jared's a better engineer, and that's my background. It's like you find somebody that's better than you at every one of those skills that you need to have. And now you got a leadership team together that basically can run the whole company. So I'm in a position where I wake up every morning and I don't have to do anything, because everybody else is better than me at doing those things. So so my job as a leader, and I try to impart this to our leaders, so it'll trickle down. The number 1 leadership behavior that I believe in is, at the C level, especially, waking up in the morning with nothing to do. It sounds strange, doesn't it?
Yeah, no, it sounds very strange. Patty, I'm going to let you take this before I set any structure for you, because I know how you like to operate, and it's not like this.
We could have Bill could do this whole talk, of course. But I just kind of piggybacking on what, first of all, I think the topic's really interesting, because you're saying leadership in a rapidly growing company, or evolving rapidly. And so it made me think, well, how is that different from just general leadership? Because I think leadership is there's certain qualities that every leader should have. And I've worked with really great leaders like Bill, and I've worked with some not so great leaders. So I've observed what I think are really great. So, some of those are kind of pretty standard. But I think what's unique about leadership in a rapidly evolving company, and that's not for everybody. There's probably a lot of CEOs of Fortune 100 or 500 companies that would not be very good at a startup. And so for me, a couple of the things that really stand out. And before I get into that, though, I think just talking about Bill's comment about cloning, I actually think it's the opposite. And you kind of described it, Bill. Putting a leadership team is key. But I think what Bill's done and what a good leader does is he puts a team together that is able to fill some of the gaps that he has or he or she has. So our leadership team as a whole, provides all of the skills that we need as a company. But no one person has all the skills needed really to run that company, or Bill probably does, but we each have our own strengths. And I think that's what's really important, is recognizing, as the leader, you recognize what your strengths are, and you make sure that you surround yourself with people who represent the skills that you don't have. But in terms of what is unique about leadership in a rapidly evolving company, I think one of the things that stands out to me, as I've made the transition, I came from Intuit, a big company. I've been to 2 startups before coming here, so thankfully I had a little bit of experience. But it's really being able to move quickly. And when you're in a big company, you got a lot of resources. It's easy to be complacent. It takes a lot longer for things to move. In a startup, you have to be moving and changing all the time. And one of the things I've really admired about Bill, because we've had this great growth. We had 10x growth in 2021, and we've been growing, but he's always pushing us. Wait, no, it's not enough. It's not enough. It's not. We can't be complacent. You can't, as you achieve a certain amount of success or growth in a startup, you think, okay, we're done. You're never done. And I think I love that Bill's always pushing us, and me in particular, which has really helped me, I think, do a better job. So I think speed and being able to move quickly is a key. I think adaptability is key. You never know what's going to happen. We also have to just adapt to an ever increasingly changing world, diverse workforce, diverse customer base. So we've got to be able to adapt and not just sort of view things from our own lens. And then again, I think it's always about solving problems and execution. I like the concept of Jim, I think it was Jim Collins in Good to Great, window versus mirror leadership. So, you're looking in the window to give credit, but you're looking in the mirror, to assign blame. So being able to really, look outwards and acknowledge the success that has come from a lot of other people, not just you, I think is important as well. So I'll stop there.
Thank you, Patty. Just going to make a comment. Coach JV and Jeremy, I'm glad you're here. You're on time. We're running a little bit late, so hang out with us, and we look forward to your next panel, which will come up shortly. But Patty, I thought Bill said he woke up with nothing to do. So what does he mean? But what do you mean by he pushes you every day? He's not supposed to be doing anything.
Well, he pushes, and then I think that's obviously not a 100% true statement, but I think the concept is good, that you have a really good team. So, and another key thing about leadership there is delegation. You have to be willing to delegate. And when you surround yourself with good people and you're willing to delegate, you don't have to micromanage. You don't have to worry because everything's getting done. I myself have a really great team. I don't have to get into the weeds of what's happening because I know they're taking care of things. And I think that's really important.
Thank you, Patty. So, David, when you first joined, and thank you that you did, Linqto, we used to talk on a regular basis, almost 2 or 3 times a week. We hardly talk now. But as you, and I know you've been part of a couple of different companies that have gone through late stage growth, gone to the NASDAQ, become public companies, and you help streamline some of this evolution of these companies from early stage, and you've actually invested in early stage companies, and then You've hopped onto companies that you've seen the transition from private to public. And I've seen you change over the last number of years in this company as well, as we rapidly grow both the employee size, employee base, and revenue size. What have you seen happen, and how have you changed some of the things that you do from one stage to the next stage? Mute.
Thank you, Karim. I miss talking with you as well. So it's such a broad topic. I mean, there's so many ways to enter an answer to your question here, but how I think about it is similar to how Patty and Bill have said. It's carving off. So I've always thought, okay, Bill carved off this finance side of him. So I'm trying to make sure I'm thinking very broadly about all the financial things that we have to do as a company and as a growing company, and the new initiatives that we're taking on. What are the financial implications of those? Taking on the initiatives, things that we don't have to do, but are helpful for us, like taking on an audit before we have to do an audit, so that we're thinking about ourselves as that larger, bigger company. It's like you wear the clothes of the job that you want to have before you have it. You know, you kind of psychologically gear yourself up for that. And that to me is just gets down to a lot of the early lessons I learned, things that Bill and Patty have already touched on. We have to lead by example. So, the tone from the top filters right through the rest of the organization. We have to make sure that, that we're setting the example. We're giving that trust and the delegation. As Patty mentioned, really happy with my team. I have a really strong controller and a really strong stock administration team that I absolutely rely on every day, so that I don't think about the details. Whereas I used to be paying all the invoices. And that's like the dishwashing thing, Bill. And I've done a lot of dishwashing in my day too. I washed a lot of dishes in college. So that was my work study program. And so I'm very familiar with the Hobart machine. I'm good. But AP was an early piece of my career. So when I started, it was just me doing all the finance stuff, and it's paying the bills. And Bill and I worked out how we're going to, handle the bank accounts and how we set it up so that we've got, two sets of eyes on things, and an approver, a creator and an approver. So I've moved those things down to in my organization so that I can go do the other things. But you have to hire the strength and then mentor your team. I wanted team members that were looking to grow their own careers as well. So I spend a lot of time with my team every day, making sure that, I gleefully cribbed off of the Agile Scrum methodology. And I just applied it to accounting. I said, okay, what'd you do yesterday? What are you doing today? What are your blockers? What can I help with? I'm here to help. And, when you give that trust and say, go make that decision, make that thing happen. How can I help? And I just try to free up the blockers that they may have. So, and the challenge is as well, I'm used to, the big change for me has been working completely remotely.
I was actually going to get into that,
Yeah.
but before you go that, let me set the stage a little bit there. So if we think about that, if we think about this whole distributed workforce, and our company's completely distributed, yeah, we have a corporate office, and that's necessary because all the Shatskis are there. But if we think of this distributed workforce, and I know we've got employees all across the US as well as internationally now, one of the things that always comes up is in legacy structure, legacy environments, you've got like, if I'm with my folks, I can see them, feel them, touch them, get a nuance of how they feel, how they're interacting with each other. There's a corporate culture that as the head of an organization or any team, I can continue to to foster and grow with a cultural environment there. In this particular environment, as Bill grows his team, direct reports, and Patty does, and you do, how then does that be instilled in your particular environments and across the company, being a distributed company? And I'll start with Bill.
Oh, Bill, you're muted.
Thanks, David. Yeah, it's a fascinating topic, and it really it goes back quite a way, because remote working in a distributed workforce is not right for every company. It just happens to be right for us, and we work with it. But the operative piece for us was we were a remote distributed company in 2010. It wasn't because the pandemic hit that we became remote. Actually, the pandemic, we launched the Linqto platform 6 weeks before the first lockdown. So what happened when the pandemic hit us was actually very positive for Linqto. We were already a remote workforce. We were already on Zoom every day. We already were running virtual conferences for the things we were doing, and then all of a sudden the world went virtual when we had 10 years worth of experience of being virtual. So that kind of helped us. But the key to that remote piece for us from the very beginning comes back to the quality of the people. Because with a remote workforce, everyone needs to be self-managed. And in the reality out in the world is it's maybe 10% of the workforce. There aren't, it's not the general workforce, the enterprise workforce is not necessarily self-managed. And I think that's where we got to give a lot of kudos to our management level people, because it's very difficult to manage when, as you say, you don't have that touchy feeling, that next piece. So for me, how I do it, basically, it comes from my math background. We have a KPI. So at the leadership level, we have a KPI for every person at the leadership level. One KPI. And we don't, each person, I'm sure Patty has 20 metrics to decide how her job, to make sure she does the job, etc. What I look at is for Patty is our net promoter score. She's our CPO. That's her KPI. So the fact that when she first started with us, 3 months later, we had a 78 NPS. I never looked at it again. I mean, who cares? Well, last month, I think I looked at it for the first time in 6 months. It was like 82 or 83 or something. And we didn't even have one detractor in it. So, I mean, the same thing with, David's KPI is our net, how much we make in net, all this stuff. He has to run the budget, he has to do all that. So last month, I think we had a $1.7 million EBITDA. Yeah. Okay. I don't have to look at that. I don't have to look at finance. It's the same thing. So my job is kind of the whack-a-mole job. I just look at the KPI. Everybody has a KPI. I know they're all good at their KPI, what they do. I look at them all. The one that's having the problem or something or going down, then I jump in and help that org structure, to get it back up. But that's really, it's a pretty simple way of looking at it. It's the only way that you can look at it when you have a remote company. Because the reality is we could have the most wonderful person in the world who the manager believes is working 24 hours a day, but really has 3 other jobs, doesn't produce results. We don't know why the person isn't producing results, because they come to every meeting. They manage to spend an hour a day working on Linqto because they can come to every meeting while they're doing 3 other jobs. We don't know that. The remote. The only way I can judge whether our people are doing what they should be doing is whether the numbers are there. So that's, it's a simple process for me. I look at the numbers, and if numbers are failing, it's you help the person, you help the group. And if the numbers are still failing, then you find another person, because it's all about the people. It's not about the product, and the people are the ones that create those numbers. So that's the top level philosophy for a remote company, how you can do it. You got to do it by the numbers.
Thank you. Patty, the question for you is this. As a rapidly evolving company, a rapidly growing company, obviously there's a need to go into and expand into markets that we're unfamiliar with, or not us, but any company that's they're unfamiliar with, internationally, geographically, linguistically, language-wise. As you look at some of these challenges in a rapidly evolving company, and that will be any company that wants to grow aggressively, what would your advice be to folks who are in this same situation or similar?
You mean in terms of adapting, you know, to the difference? I mean, I've actually, I just want to touch on the remote thing for a second, because I do think it's all, as Bill said, it's all about the people. And I think one thing that's important there is remote work is not for everybody. And you kind of have to know that. That's part of the, I think, skill of hiring. You know, I remember I worked at a startup where we were co-located, and I'm always been a person that's just heads down and kind of working. And the company provided lunch. And if you went during lunchtime, you'd see about half the people sitting around tables, socializing, talking about lunch, which is a great thing. But there half other people were sitting down at their desk with their lunch, and I was one of those people. And I just remember thinking, these are people that would be able to work remotely. The people who are sitting around the table socializing and playing games at lunchtime probably would not be good remote workers. So anyway, you have to know, you have to find the right people. I think the fact that, you know, as far as going into other markets in the software world and product and engineering, this is something we do often. We haven't done it here yet at Linqto as far as going overseas, but it's an easy thing to do. And you know, the lucky thing for us is there's so many companies that have paved the way, and that you can go to any country. It used to be India. India had, you know, that's where you went for engineers, and now they've gotten quite expensive. Ukraine, interestingly, there's a lot of software development going on there. I'm not sure if that's held up much, but I did some work with a team in Slovakia, Philippines. So these labor pools exist, and most of them speak English. The hardest part from my experience, when you're going into new markets and dealing with remote workforces in various regions, is the time zone difference. You know, with India, when I worked with India, I've worked with India teams in several different companies. It's 12 hours, 12 and a half hours, depending on what time of year it is. So, you know, you get up and you maybe have a couple of hours before, you know, their end of their day. Most teams I've worked with adjust to the US company's time zone, but not always. And so you have to manage that. You have to manage that, you know, at the end of your day, you make sure that you've got everything ready to go for the team that's going to be working 12 and a half hours ahead, so that they can get a lot of work done. And sometimes it works to your advantage, because a bug comes in, your team's, you know, end of their day, and you turn it over to the team in India and they can get it done. So there's a lot of advantages to that. But I think there's the availability of resources, at least in my area, is not a problem. And I think the skills are there. There's certainly cultural differences, but I think language, most of in the engineering world and product world, in design, they speak English, which is helpful. So really, it's just a time zone that I think needs some adjustment.
Thank you. So Paul, David, so running a company that's a distributed workforce in locations, jurisdictions, state laws, and international regulations for employment, and then pair that up with the differences that we have, or any company, but we have in the employee base, starting at 22 as probably the youngest employee, or 23. I'm talking about that sort of gender and age, and going up to a little bit older, perhaps my age and yours. We won't talk about other people.
Better not start talking about my age, Karim.
But when you see, and I know you've got eyes on all of this, when you see this, and then aligning some of the challenges that you may have bringing this community together, this company community together with the different mindsets, and offsetting this also with some of the environmental or changes in the places that we have employees. How do you manage all of this effectively, and what do you see challenges and solutions for other companies that may be facing the same situation?
Well, I parsed it into two things. One is, I've got my own team that I try to worry about, and then I try to step back a little bit and look at, well, how are we doing this for the whole company? And so there's two elements to that. For me, we want to try to treat people globally, as equitably as we can. And we are up against some different rules in different places, but we try to do our best as a small firm to bridge that. I don't want to over administer stuff too. That's the other side of it is, I think when we contrast small companies to big companies, there's a lot of resources that are in place to handle the all the international laws. This is probably a place where we're going to add sophistication as we move forward in the company. We're just crossing that 50 employees, and you take the extended work team where we have some additional consulting resources, and we're in the mid 60s when you add it all up. So we're just crossing those thresholds where you don't necessarily know everybody in the company. Whereas a year ago, I would have, I could have named them without looking at a list going down. There's no way I could do that at the moment. And so the challenges are, working to create community, making sure that we have a meeting where we review at least once a quarter with kind of an all hands, so that people do have a chance to feel a little bit of the community. We're having a Christmas party, a celebration next week for a couple hours, quite intentionally, just to have fun and celebrate the company's success and get to know a little bit more about each other, especially some of the newer folks. I think we really have to make sure we look at those opportunities, but I contrast that with, the startup. And I've been just dismayed when I hear things that our good friend, Mr. Musk, puts out there, maximum commitment. I'm like, oh my God, well, that's a whole, I would say, I don't understand that kind of management style. It just doesn't make sense to me. But we do have to have these self-starters that keep the company going and then reach out. And I think that there's an extra skill that you have to have as a remote employee. You have to not be afraid to just say, hey, I just got to reach out to somebody. I reach out to people somewhat randomly every week. It's like they don't know why I'm calling them. And that's how I used to run, and I called it financial management by walking around. I used to know the president to the person who received the stuff at the dock in some of the firms that I've worked with, where we had, we came to work because there was a factory that we were supporting. You can't do a factory in a remote environment. It doesn't work. So, but it was really fun to be able to just show up and just say, hey, how are things going? And, hey, I can help you with that transaction you were having a problem with. And, you're there and you give. So it's always, how do I help somebody succeed? What is it that I can offer them? And that's helps set the success if everybody kind of has that attitude.
So that actually, you've covered a lot, and I want people to actually pay attention to the words that we used today in this conversation, because it's been intentional, the words that they've used. And keeping in mind, everyone who's listening to this now and in the future, when you replay this video, this was a non-setup panel, and everything that you're hearing is completely authentic and no preparation for it. And that was intentional, because we do want to hear how this company's function and other companies take heart from it, because this is how you operate, right? It's not a prepared speech. I'll tell you, one of the things that impressed me the most is, as we continue to go through this rapidly growing company, and one of the most important things is not get wrapped up in a mindset or limitation of who we think we are, or who we think, or what we think we can achieve. And if we've learned anything from these events in the last couple of days, is we are as strong and powerful and in ourselves as long as we believe that that is who we are, and the achievements that we can get to are only limited by what we set our minds to. And so, and when you go through a rapidly evolving environment, things will change. The constraints of resources will change. The KPIs will change. The requirements that you require of your team will change. And what David has said may not be intentional, but if you have team members and they are aligned with the value, mission, and the dreams of the company, all of us have to be on the same page, because otherwise you won't get to where you want to go. Because sometimes you get into a job that you haven't been educated for, but you may learn into or lean into, and actually ask your teammates, ask your colleagues, like David had said, hey, I do need assistance here. If you're sitting down for lunch, if that's the person you are, that's great, but you may not be right for a particular role or company, or you might be, but let's keep all these differences in mind. And one of the greatest things I think I learned during this experience is with this growing team, and we'll close out with that, is a great example of the fleas in a jar. And Bill, if you want to explain that, fleas in a jar, you know, we've lived a long time, but every day we learn something. And being in our leadership meetings, I learn something every day, and this is one of them. So Bill, please, if you wouldn't mind. You're on mute. You're on mute.
Yeah. One of the things that we talked about in one of our leadership meetings is about fleas in a jar. This goes back to, I don't know if you guys ever saw old movies or things where they had flea circuses at these carnivals and things in the 1930s. And basically the flea circuses were all these fleas who were in a jar, but they wouldn't jump outside the jar. This was in 8th grade Mrs. Rideout biology class where I first saw this experiment. So if you can get fleas into a jar, because they jump all over the place. So she had this jar that was full of fleas. They're jumping all over. She put a lid on the jar and then left the lid on the jar for 3 days. And 3 days later, you know, after 3 days of classes, she took the lid off the jar. None of the fleas jumped out of the jar. After 3 days of hitting their heads against the top of the jar, they just realized there was a barrier there, and it got into their DNA. They couldn't jump out of the jar. Well, the fact is, not only could they not jump out of the jar, they can't jump out of the jar until they die. I mean, it lasts forever. And if they have offspring, their offspring can't jump out of the jar. And the reason for talking about this is what happens a lot in the company. You put fleas in a jar. If everyone in the company has a certain top, you'll never get past that top, because everybody's jumping at the same speed, and they all believe that there's a certain limit at the top, and they can't. So that's always one of the things that I felt was important for a CEO, is once in a while to be able to take the lid off of the jar, get the fleas jumping around a lot, because that's what happened. One of the things I say a lot is that at the leadership level, it's like herding cats. I mean, you want that kind of energy. You want innovation. When you're hiring people, you want people that are creative. I mean, the best people that you can have working with you are people that challenge you every day, and, you know, not the yes people. And so it takes a little bit more of a management skill, but you have to be able to let them jump out of the jar. You have to give people, it's trust. If I could leave this session with one thought, really, I mean, with our customer, it's about trust. And that's how I build the leadership team. Look, you know, start with this group that's right here, Karim. Karim was the second investor when we went out to raise money back in 2016. He was also the fourth investor. He was also the 12th investor, I think. He believed in us. He believed in our team. And in those days, it was about building banking apps. It wasn't even about what we're doing now. He didn't come to work for us till 2020, but 4 years earlier, I knew this was a person I could trust. He became a friend. He got on our board. David, same thing. David was in that same first round, and it's, he invested in this company long before he became involved in this company as a CFO. Patty didn't come to work for us until about a year ago. But the reason she's working for us is that she and Jared and Eric and I and our whole team worked together at Intuit Financial Services a decade ago. And I knew that she was the person that we wanted. And it didn't happen overnight. I think it took us 9 or 10 months to convince her to come on board. But it's trust is so important. And I think we have that at our leadership level. We have trust, and then that trickles down to everyone else, because there's trust throughout the organization. We couldn't operate because it's the pistolero. You got to be able to fire quickly and do things. You can't do that if you don't have a team around you that you trust. And so really, for me, that's what it all comes back to, is the trust factor.
Thank you, David. Thank you, Patty. Thank you, Bill. This has been enlightening. It's been about Linqto, but it's been about Linqto emerging rapidly. And some of the things that we've learned here are some experiences that we want to impart to the rest of you who are building companies or who are investing in companies, because you've got to be able to look at what the management and leadership team is doing in those investable companies that foster and allow these companies to grow and grow rapidly. And what are some of the things when you do a due diligence, look at what they're saying, look at how they're writing, look at how they're communicating, and some of these values and qualities are part of your process of due diligence, right? Once you start to see this, you get an understanding of who you're working with, who you're investing with, and whether you can do that and whether you should be doing that. And this is part of what we're trying to do when we've gone through these conversations about identity, trust, transparency, due diligence. These are all parts of the conversation that need to be fit together before you move forward with any of your investments. And so I thank you, Bill and Patty and David, for taking the leap today without being prepared, and being here, open to being transparent and organic. Thank you so much.